Today, what I'm going to do is something a little different. In the past, you've heard me talk about what kind of products and services I have, what kind of people I want those products and services in front of, and kind of how we do what we do at Backup Rx. Today, take a little bit different tact. What I'm going to do today is tell you why I do what I do. But first, let's do a little bit of definitions. What's disaster recovery? What's the actual meaning of the term? Well, it's actually the process, the policies, and the procedures that are related to preparing for any kind of recovery or continuation of your technology infrastructure, which are vital to your organization after a natural or human-induced disaster. Basically, all that means is that this is what keeps your business going. Disaster recovery focuses on IT, the technology systems that support all your business functions. As opposed to business continuity, which you've heard me talk about a couple of times. Business continuity is actually the planning part of this. It takes into everything, including employees and how they're going to be able to communicate if something should happen. So all aspects of keeping the business functioning, that's the planning stage or the business continuity stage. So disaster recovery, what we like to do in our business, that's actually a subset of this overall business continuity. Disaster recovery actually was developed back in the 70s, mid to late 70s, as computer data managers figured out that we were relying a whole lot on this information that these giant mainframes have. And most of the early systems were big mainframe computers that used something called batch data-oriented material. And that type of material was more for storage than it was for immediate use. So companies could actually get along for a couple of days without having that system available to them. It wasn't that big a deal. No significant damage done to the company for not being able to access that data for a couple of days. During the 80s and the 90s, disaster recovery, it became this big, huge industry. The awareness of what was going on in the disaster recovery industry grew rapidly, most of it driven by the fact that everybody wanted to communicate at the same time, so computer manufacturers developed what they called open systems. Now, open systems means that software you're using on an HP computer will also work on a Dell computer, it would work on an old Gateway computer, blah, blah, blah. Those are open systems. Real-time processing also drove this trend. Real-time processing meaning that you're going to do all the number crunching and have immediate results. You're not going to upload it to a giant mainframe and next week your report was going to come out. So real-time processing became a driving force for disaster recovery awareness. Another thing that happened, and I'm sure you're familiar with these terms, government regulations mandating business continuity and disaster recovery for different types of organizations in various sectors of the economy. Everybody's familiar with HIPAA and Sarbanes-Oxley and GLBA, PCI, as was mentioned earlier. These things drove the need for better disaster recovery and better planning of business continuity. Internet, big thing that drove this industry to be the giant that it is today. Throughout the late 90s and into the 2000s, organizations of all sizes became dependent on the continuous availability of their IT systems. Couldn't wait those 2 days anymore, couldn't even wait a day. What they're shooting for nowadays is the 5 nines. 99.999% of the time they have their data available to them. This high availability is now the norm because systems have become critical. So increased awareness also driven by things like cyber terrorism, terrorist attacks like the Twin Towers, earthquakes, hurricanes, tsunamis, floods, tornadoes in this part of the world. These things all drove this industry to develop things like hot site technology and high availability solutions, all things that Backup Rx can help companies with. So what causes data loss? Now this is going to be very surprising to most of you. 44% of the time, it's a hardware or system malfunction. 44% of the time. That's a hard drive crash, a motherboard or a controller card failure, even power outages. Those kind of things are in this category. The second is human error. 32% of the time, disgruntled employees, absent-minded employees, people you shouldn't have had in that position. This type of loss is often the most overlooked. It's the least talked about, I can guarantee you. Software corruption accounts for another 14% of the data that's lost annually, and the older the software, keep this in mind, talking about Windows XP, the older the software, the more likely that it will cease to function properly at some point, whether it becomes corrupt or there are things about it that allow it to be corrupted. Strangely enough, one of the smaller sections is computer viruses, and people always say it's only 7%, but everybody's always talking about all this stuff. We're talking about data loss here. A lot of the viruses that are out there, the majority of them, just do something different. They might steal your data, but they leave it on your computer. So if we're talking strictly loss, this is a small portion of it. The smallest portion is natural disasters, which also seems kind of strange. But getting back to the main point, 76% of this is either caused by the hardware you're using or the people that are using it. So keep that in mind. Now, the fun part, what's it cost when you have a disaster? Well, the cost of data loss or data disaster is directly related, to the value of the data and the length of time that it's needed but unavailable. That's very important. These different aspects can be considered. The cost of notifying all of your users in case of a data compromise, the cost of continuing without the data. Sometimes you can't even do that. The cost of recreating the data, the cost of reputation repair. Look at what Target's going through right now to repair their reputation after they got all that data stolen. It's a lot of money that they have to spend. As a matter of fact, in 2007, the average cost was $187 per individual record. In 2013, that cost went up to $277. Now, my source for this is something called the Ponemon Institute. Don't ask me if that's misspelled as Pokemon or not. It's not. It's Ponemon. The average, in the United States, average malicious data breach or data loss resulted in 28,765 exposed or compromised records. So do the quick math. Almost $8 million it cost the average company to recover from a significant data loss. Can y'all afford that? I don't know anybody in this room that can afford to spend $8 million to get their business back. So what's the end result? That's what generally happens. Believe it or not, 46% of the time, if a company suffers a very bad data loss, that's the next sign you'll see. We take care of it with a number of different things, from offsite data storage, offsite backup and recovery. We also do failover servers. We do local and cloud disaster recovery and business continuity solutions. We do co-locations, virtual cloud servers. That's infrastructure as a service. You might have heard that term. We do virtual desktops, hosted applications, hosted Exchange, hosted PBX. We do all of this kind of stuff. And if you want to learn more about it, I'm a good guy to have a one-to-one with because I eat very little and I won't make you pay for it. Shelley.
What would be your dream client? I mean, like right now, if you could say, this is the sweet spot for me.
Dream client would be somebody that wants to get rid of all their hardware. Now, that's a strange response, but because we do so much stuff virtually, we like to keep people from buying new servers, from buying new hard drives, from buying new computers. We can virtualize a lot of that. Yes, sir.
If you had a person or a company that did have data loss and they, let's say they take their computers to the Apple store or to wherever, and I know they can do data recovery, but they typically farm that out to somebody else. Is that something that you can do?
We don't do that type of recovery because we prevent that type of situation from happening. And that type of recovery is very expensive. It can cost thousands of dollars. Yeah.
Thank you, David. Fantastic.
You're welcome.